I was splitting myself still between two different worlds of not feeling like either one was where I found wholeness. That is not a recipe for
No, you can only stay in that liminal place for so
right,
long.
right, right, yeah.
It is my highest privilege to have my friend Steve Larson join us on the channel today. Steve is a well-respected member of the urban agricultural movement. He's the manager of Living City Farms in Akron, Ohio, and he's one of my closest friends. Steve and I were roommates of sorts. We traveled on our bicycles for nearly a year together, down California, through Mexico, and Central America. We've stayed in close contact ever since. And I've invited Steve to share his background as well as a spiritual journey and to talk about how he sees the deeper patterns of reality through gardening and soil ecology. Plus, he started reading The Language of Creation by Matthew Bajot. So hopefully we can get into that. Steve, welcome to the channel.
Hey, Derek, thanks for inviting me. It's a big honor to be able to talk to you on this and also just to share insights on my journey, as I'm also learning more about your journey and how, even though we traveled together a while back, that there's still similar things and paths being taken by us. That's really exciting.
Yeah, I consider it quite a privilege. You know, think of all the people that we said goodbye to along our journey, and you're one of the very few that get to continue with me or continue together in all of these different chapters of life.
Yeah, it's great.
All right, Steve. So why don't you start out by telling us a little bit about your background and maybe about your parents or the setting of which you grew up?
Sure, yeah. So I grew up in a place called Talmadge, Ohio. It's in northeast Ohio, and it's a suburb of Akron, which is where I live. And Akron's got like 200,000 people in it, so it's a small city, and Talmadge has probably less than 20,000. It's a small place, and I don't know if this was an urban myth growing up, but we used to say that at one point Talmadge was in the Guinness Book of World Records for the amount of churches per capita. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's a pretty Christian town, small town, not very diverse. So it's, I would say, a pretty stereotypical suburb. Um, my family grew up in Michigan, in southern Michigan, and when they were married early on, before they had my sister and I, they moved to northeast Ohio in search for work. So that's how they got down here. So didn't grow up with my immediate family super close. I was able to see them every once in a while. My family was Lutheran when I was growing up, so I went to church every Sunday, went to Sunday school. Once I was in middle school, started doing youth group, and in high school doing youth group. Did the Lutheran confirmation in, I think it was 8th grade.
What was that like?
You know, I don't remember too much of it. I do remember though, at the time I was getting really into reggae music, and my parents thought I was worshiping Bob Marley. And so my pastor literally sat me down in his office to have a talk that there's a lot of nice sounding religions in the world, but this is the only one. So I wasn't worshiping Bob Marley, but it's kind of one of those things that we'll talk about it later, me leaving the church. There's a lot of traumas that had happened growing up within it, even though it was still a pretty good atmosphere. There are certain things like that that created scars that have resurfaced in my life that I've been more recently, within the past couple of years, trying to deal with them and understand them on a deeper level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how about in like high school and then transitioning out of your parents' house and into university?
Yeah. So in high school, I'd say one of the things that I do really appreciate about my family and growing up within that church setting is that they always showed a lot of love and support for me. And so it was that kind of embodiment of unconditional love I feel like I was really able to receive when I was growing up. And so that's really laid a really positive foundation for me. And so I'd say like my faith was really strong throughout throughout high school. And then when I went to college, I was kind of opened up to a different world. And I'd say going through high school as well, I started studying Spanish, and I had this discontentment for where I lived, growing up in the suburbs, a very not diverse place, like I'd mentioned. So it's a very like Caucasian culture and population. And learning Spanish was a way for me to try to seek more diversity and a different way of viewing reality, because it's just like I wanted to be outside in the woods. I always loved being in nature, and suburbia is a very kind of like cookie cutter way of living. It's like you live in a box, you believe this way, you do this because this is what society wants you to do, and it just I I wasn't happy with that. And so I actually used studying Spanish as a means of kind of trying to withdraw from that and seek refuge into something else. And at the same time, during that process, I got grounded for smoking marijuana when I was a freshman in high school, and was grounded for a few months. And instead of like rebelling and doing outward things, I started to learn more about yoga and meditation, went vegetarian, and just like went really inward. And so I think that helped lay a foundation for me to have more contemplation and introspection as I would move on. So when I entered college, it was kind of like a culmination of being more introspective and critical of the culture that I was brought up in. And so I had questions and I didn't have answers, and the kind of the box that reality was put into for me growing up was no longer fitting within the reality that I was starting to see and being opened up to. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So, I mean, how was that received when your parents found out that you're majoring in Spanish and then also your minor in geography, right?
Yeah, and actually, so they all along, I mean, in high school, I took, I think, 5 Spanish classes. And so that was just kind of the next, like the logical thing for me to do, because in society, after high school, you go to college. And so this is like, well, this is what I'm supposed to do. And I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And when people would ask me, what do you want to do? I would say, I want to travel and talk to people. And I loved speaking Spanish. I was also studying Arabic at the time. And so I was looking for a university that taught both Spanish and Arabic. So I just kind of really put myself into learning language. And so they were supportive of that aspect of it. But the me questioning other things, I think, was difficult for them.
Yeah, but a very natural part of the coming of age for any young man or woman. So
Right,
the other thing too is like the movie Arrival, as well as the book, The Story of Your Life, that it's based upon by Ted Chiang. It has a part that talks about this linguistics theory about when you study another language, you're actually appropriating the worldview or the perspective of that culture of which the language is produced or spoken. And that just got me like really thinking too. It's like, oh my goodness, like here you are, you're in suburbia, but you can have this outside in perspective through learning, through education and speaking another language.
Yeah, no, and I feel like I was really blessed to have that understanding when that was happening. And so like my senior year of high school, I had I think 1 or 2 Spanish classes that I was in. I was studying Arabic at the university through a university program that had just started, and I was taking a French class for fun. And so like I was just super intrigued with this.
They're just stacking it up.
Yeah, but that idea that language isn't just, it's so easy. Like if you only speak one language, you read a translation of a text and you're like, well, I get what they're saying. But once you actually start to understand the context of the words that are being spoken and see it as a different way of viewing and processing and describing reality, then for me, that got me really excited, because it just, even to this day, there's this desire and longing to understand what reality is. And so it's fascinating to think of it on a cultural level where, and speaking about patterns, where it's like different cultures have different ways of describing different manifestations of these patterns within the world. And yeah, I just find it a very fascinating way to approach learning a language, and then being able to interact and be in relationship with people that speak a different language. Because even when we were traveling and speaking with people in Spanish or in English, it was almost like if they spoke to us in their second language, it felt like a different person was talking. But when they would go to their first language, it was just, sometimes it was like night and day.
Yeah.
And it's just super interesting.
Yeah, one of the interesting moments I can remember is when we were in Oaxaca, which they still have well over 25 living languages that are not Spanish. And we were talking with people, and I was like, man, like, I feel like their grammar's way off. And it's like, how is it that my Spanish is maybe even a little bit better than theirs at times? And I think you or someone pointed out, it's like, it's because Spanish is their like second or third language.
Right.
It's like, so we're both connecting with our second or third languages.
Yeah.
So let's get into that. So you graduate from university, and then what?
Yeah. So then I got on a bicycle with a friend, and I went west. Or technically I went north and then I went west.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, yeah, so you were able to get to know Chad and travel with Chad, but for everyone else, I started, when I graduated, I went on a bicycle trip to the West Coast, and I went with a friend from high school. And during the middle of our college education, during the summertime, we went on, I think it was a 3-day bike ride to a rainbow gathering, which is a gathering in a different national forest every summer that a bunch of people come and just kind of be and celebrate life with each other. And there was one at a national forest about 3 bicycle days away from where we lived. And so we decided to ride our bikes there. We're there for about a week and then 3 days back. And so that really showed us how magical it can be living and riding on a bicycle. Mm-hmm. More so just from the standpoint of getting on a bike and going, and then stopping, sleeping, then getting on a bike and going. And so it's like going on a bicycle ride every day, except you don't go back home. And so that, and just the experiences of the people that we met, really showed us that there's something magical to this, and we like to experience more of it. And so we just kind of like joking around said to each other, hey, when we graduate, let's ride our bikes across the country. And maybe a half a year before we were about to graduate, we're like, hey, are we serious about this?
Yeah, let's go to what people have been calling the ocean.
Right. And so yeah, so we just started to do more research on it and plan for it, and had a tentative idea that we want to go to the West Coast. Weren't sure what we were going to do when we were out there, when or how we'd come back, but we were just like, hey, let's go. My family wasn't the biggest fan of that sort of tentative planning, because it's like, well, when are you going to come home? How are you going to do this, this, and this, and this? And but again, it was like that longing to break free of that rigidness and just experience, because up to that point, everything was laid out for me of the next step. And so I was finally confronted with the opportunity to allow that next step to be whatever I wanted it to be. And so, yeah, it started at just wanting this epic bicycle adventure going to the West Coast.
Yeah, so somewhere along the way, you picked up another traveler, me. Yeah. And I just wondered, like, what was it like at that point when we began traveling together, you, me, Chad, and at times others, and dogs?
Yeah, because at that point, Chad and I had already made it to the West Coast. We went to Washington State and then down to the coast into Oregon, and found some work with a friend for like 2 months. So we're at this point where we had paused the traveling, and we knew that we weren't ready to stop traveling. Because it's like, all right, got to the West Coast. Do we go back? Do we keep doing something? And we both felt that we still had more to learn and experience by being on a bicycle. And so we were starting to get a little bit of antsy. and talking with you, finding out you're only like maybe an hour away from where we were working. You're also feeling a little bit antsy, like you wanted to get back on the bicycle. And I do remember when we met in Missoula, Montana, that I had this distinct feeling when we were leaving where I was just like, man, I really felt a connection with this guy that I feel like he's going to come back up at some point. Like it's incomplete.
Yeah. And
It's
like
not
2,000
complete.
miles later,
Right.
you meet up
Right.
again.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I remember like right off the bat, like I think the second day we traveled, you're like, oh, there's one stop I want to make. And it's this location right next to Point Reyes along the coast and next to this national park. It's called this Vedanta property or, community that they had out there. And I remember like that became like part of the series of our journey was like, we would stop at temples, we would stop at all of these interesting things. And to that point that, that was, fairly foreign to me. I was wondering if you could just maybe describe that a little bit of why you were so compelled to make these regular stops along the way.
Yeah. So I'd, I guess, mentioned that when I entered college and I kind of had left the church, I don't think there's ever a period of time where I considered myself atheist. And so I just like, I guess from that perspective of language, I didn't feel like the language that I was taught growing up fit the experiences that I was starting to have and to learn about. And so like the language I had was not appropriate anymore. And so traveling really highlighted that for me, where going across the country, it was kind of like this more of an emphasis on this epic adventure that we're doing on a bicycle. And as time went on, that adrenaline rush that was super strong and really motivating to keep going and seeing new things was slowly starting to diminish. And so that drive just to do things as this sense of adventure without purpose wasn't really doing it for me anymore. And so it slowly was transforming into this longing to seek more meaning and seek answers and seek God. And so when I was when we were at my friend's house working for those 2 months, I read a few books. One about a saint named Sri Ramakrishna that really drew my attention, of just the way that he spoke about reality as and God not as something that's off in the future or that we have to wait for, but that can be this intimate relationship that we have right here and right now, and that the highest purpose of our life is to be in relationship with that. That everything else, things might be in, he wasn't trying to say nothing else is important, but he just like, but at the end of the day, this is what matters. And again, being at this place where I was able to decide what was the next step for me, where it's like, well, I can go back home, get a job, do the career thing, and what society wants me to do, or I could potentially experience God right here and right now in this most vivid and intimate way. And that captivated me. And I was like, nothing else sounds quite as attractive as that does to me right now.
I remember when we were down in LA, we were at a Vedanta ashram, and the leader of this ashram was having a conversation with the three of us, and he was like, okay, so why are you guys just, traveling and traveling and traveling? I think he said you're kind of like the waves or something like that. He's like, when are you going to stop and actually build upon something, And I just remember that being like, no, I have a pretty good sense that we're not quite ready for that, but it does feel like somewhat of this foreshadowing, but like, I'm not reading a book. This is my life. Like at that point, it felt like I entered into this narrative space while traveling on bicycle, and it became like a spiritual journey, like you're describing.
Yeah.
Or things that normally happen in magical narratives. It's like, no, that was like my life from day to day. Did you have a similar perspective during that time?
Totally. Yeah. Because during college, I would be reading books about people that were on some spiritual journey, and they wrote this book about it, and it's like, wow, that's really cool. I'm glad their life was like that, but little old me, I couldn't have an experience like that. And then it finally dawned on me through these experiences that everyone has the capacity to have a life that is a pilgrimage. Like your whole entire life is that, not just a small little portion of it, or you're on a bicycle and that's the only piece of it, but like we can live our life through that perspective. And so that was really big for me, of that realization that I don't just have to read a book about it, but that can be my life as well. And life's pretty exciting and exhilarating when you're living that.
Yeah. So were there any other maybe revelations or big takeaways from that year-long trip that we were on together that you wanted to share?
Whew. Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot to unpack from those experiences. But I think for me, some of like the things, and again, like it's in the place where I'm at right now too, it's just, this journey is a very spiralic journey, and it's not linear. And so there's teachings or lessons that I learned something from, and then maybe like a year, 5, 10 years later, I learned something different from that lesson. And it wasn't saying the other thing was wrong, but it's just like an added depth that comes to it. And so like my relationship to these experiences is growing in depth sometimes. And so for me, it's been fascinating to just try to be more relational with everything that I do, and even in including my past in those experiences. And so like some of the big patterns that I see highlighted through that experience, that keeps coming back around in various iterations, is this faith in God, even if I don't have the knowledge to kind of know what God is, who God is, all the qualities and whatnot, but just this faith in that mystery and this surrender to that mystery, and this longing to be intimately interacting with that mystery, and that life can be this beautiful process of that as a journey. And so it's just like that bicycle journey, I feel like really christened the rest of my life as a journey or pilgrimage towards and with God.
Yeah, quite the christening indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me, like, so like on the practical level, like we would wake up, we would pack up our tent, or maybe we were staying as a guest in someone's home, and we'd pack up our bikes, and everything we pretty much had was in about 4 or 5 or whatever loose hanging clippings off of our bike.
Yeah.
And we'd set off, and we'd have no idea what the next destination was. There was no campground that we had circled. There was no location, or rarely a person that we had connected with to go visit. I mean that, of course, that happens sometimes, but on the regular day basis, we just did not know. And it really, like, it really got us into this mode of life, this mode of being, or mode of action, that was imbued with faith. And not faith as in like the blind adherence to belief or a set of lists of what we think is right or not. It was more of like an intimate trust that we would be okay, that things would open up, that doors would avail themselves and open up, and that people would connect with us. And there's just like some of the connections we made were just like, it felt like angels, like what people describe as like entertaining and visiting angels.
Yeah,
I know they were like people, and they had names and they were very real, but like just the interaction was so amazing to witness, but also be very much a part of.
Yeah. And still to this day, I just feel so blessed, because not many people have the opportunity to remove themselves from the normal trajectory of society, and to be engrossed in that day-to-day faith of allowing God the to take the reins of how your day is going to happen, and not just like for a couple of days or a week, but like an extended period of time, where just I don't know what my life would be like if I hadn't have gone through that experience. And
Hmm.
thankfully, I don't have to know what it would be like.
Heck, man, that's a really good reminder because, obviously we came home eventually, that leader of the ashram in LA was correct. I flew home
Yeah.
in Guatemala
Uh-huh.
City and you in Costa Rica, and we came home, and now it's like I have a family and there's certain responsibilities, and I have this sedentary life that is, has its routines and its order and the organization and all of the practicalities that come along with that. And I
Mm-hmm.
love it. I embrace the season of life, but then I sit and I think, I'm like, man, there was days where like I would just set off and have no idea, like I was just in the hands of God, so to speak,
Yeah.
and in the care of others. And you know what? I turned out more than okay, 99% of the time. So I think we can get through this day,
Yeah. Right. Right.
not understanding, what, I don't know, insurance claim to form, or, whatever, like what form to fill out for self-employment, or, like sometimes we can freak out about these things. And then I slow down and I'm like, okay, there was that intimate trust of like, I had no idea where I was going to sleep
Mm-hmm.
in the evening, and I was okay.
Right. Right. Right.
So, Steve, what was it like when you did come home? What was that transition like from this, amazing, magical uh, position in life that you were in, and then back to house and job, and what was that like?
Yeah. It was definitely a bit of a struggle. I was lucky that I initially came back to study with a friend of mine that was Lakota. And the whole reason why I left Latin America was to study with this friend. And I had realized that my biggest fear, because part of the journey for me was facing fears just like head on, and I didn't want them to stop me. And I finally came to realize that the biggest fear that I was having at that point in my life was going home and not being able to hold on to all the lessons that I learned and the transformations that I'd gone through. And that for me, it's like, well, if that's one of the goals of this journey is to combat my fears, then like it would be cool if it kept going through Latin America, but that's not what I need to do right now. I need to go home. Um, and so luckily a friend of mine has a vegan organic restaurant that started an organic farm, and she had work for me there. And so I was able to live with her, work on the farm, and so still be outdoors. So that was really big for me, that I didn't have to just go straight back to a 9 to 5 job, but that I could be farming. And I was connected to a couple different ashrams that were near me through the lineage of Sri Ramakrishna. And so on the weekends, once to twice a month, I'd be going over to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, or to somewhere else to visit with monks that were coming in and devotees there, and kind of kept that spiritual journey going. And at that point, I was questioning whether or not I wanted to become a monk. And so I wasn't really able to take the material realm that seriously. And so I didn't go back into like a normal job, in starting a family, where I was still in this questioning mode of, I don't know what my place is in society yet. I don't know if it means completely rejecting it in order to pursue God through this formal way, or what it needs to look like. So like my farming was more so just a job that I wasn't morally opposed to. And it was kind of like place holding my space in society, of giving me some money so I could pay my bills so that I can do my spiritual thing. Um, and that was kind of like a common pattern for me of this false binary or dualism of spiritual life and the world, and that they have to be these two separate things.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So like spirituality versus secularism could be said
Right.
as
Yeah.
well. Hmm.
Yeah. And so that was definitely a big struggle coming back, and it's been maybe 6 or 7 years now, and so it's been a process of just like an up and down journey of trying to make sense of all of it, and still process all those experiences that I've had growing up, going on that bicycle journey and other journeys that I've been on, trying to make sense of it, being an embodied being in the world.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm wondering too, like as you are unfolding this life in your hometown, right? You still feel somewhat of like the role of the foreigner, right? So
Mm.
did you begin transitioning from, you know, feeling out of place to feeling at home or in place, and maybe the work that you did or the things that you were studying?
Yeah. I feel like there's again this like very dualistic sense of feeling home where I felt more at home going to the ashram and hanging out and being with the people there. But that's not where I lived and that's not where I was working. But there's also part of me that, as confused as I was about my work with agriculture, part of me like deep down knew that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know exactly what that means, but like there's something in it. But I still didn't feel completely at home with it. So it was like this, splitting myself between two different worlds of not feeling like either one was where I found wholeness. And that is not a recipe for
No, you can only stay in that liminal place for so
right,
long.
right, right, yeah.